I've been helping people invest in property for over 12 years. So 99% of my time is spent talking about the best strategies and the best areas to invest in. But sometimes I meet a potential investor who isn't ready, and I end up advising them to take a completely different route, or even plead with them to do nothing at all because they're just not ready to pull the trigger. So in this video, I'm going to talk you through the 6 major signs you're not ready to invest in property. So by the end of this video, you either decide property isn't for you, or you'll have all the steps and advice you need to take in order to get ready. So let's kick off with sign number 1, which I think might surprise you. Most people assume that if you have enough money, property investing is fairly passive and straightforward. Because when investing in stocks, for example, you can drop your money into an index fund and pretty much forget about it. So you might assume property works the same way, but this catches a lot of people out. I often see cases, unfortunately, where someone might invest £200,000 into a property because on paper it looks perfect. But 6 months down the line, they've lost £45,000 because renovation costs were double what they expected. The property sat empty while their mortgage racked up. And then just when they think they're finally winning, a legal letter about a chunky fine drops through their letterbox, simply because they didn't do enough research and missed crucial details about licensing regulations. And with rental reform happening in 2025, these kinds of oversights will become even more costly. So this is the first sign you aren't ready to invest in property. You haven't invested time in understanding the basics. You don't need to become an expert, but you do have to educate yourself a little before jumping in. And the fact that you're here on YouTube suggests you're doing that already. So if you can put in just an hour a day for 3 months, you'll save yourself from the kind of expensive mistakes that we see in our Sunday Times column every week. However, unfortunately, YouTube is also where I see people fall prey to a different type of danger. I often meet aspiring investors who've spent £15,000 or more on property education, mentorships, boot camps, inner circles, and countless online courses, all promising the same thing: the secret to building a property portfolio without any money. I mean, it's appealing, right? The idea that you can skip the hard part of saving up. But here's what these courses don't tell you. Property investing is brilliant at growing wealth you already have. It's not designed for creating wealth from scratch. Yes, no money down deals do exist. I'm not denying that the information is accurate and there are genuine success stories, but they're like trying to complete a marathon without ever having run before. Technically possible, but not the smart way to start. You do need cash. And to know the exact amount you need, it's dead easy. Just take any property you're looking at and divide the price by 3. That gives you enough for a 25% deposit, plus stamp duty and your other costs. For example, if you're eyeing up a £150,000 property, you'll need about £50,000 available, and obviously even more if refurbs are part of your plans. If you don't have that kind of cash saved up just yet, then that's your sign that you're not ready to invest. And while that might sound disappointing, it's much better to spend a couple of years saving up while learning about the market than to chase shortcuts that don't work. And let me ask you another question. If you wanted to get fit, which option do you think is more likely to work? A, having a clear target like losing 10 kilos, or B, just saying, I want to get fitter. Now, logically, you should know that option A is the right answer. But when it comes to property investing, a lot of people pick the second option. They get overexcited and they just let their gut feel take over. And even experienced investors can suffer from this problem. I actually know someone who built a portfolio of over 100 properties until he went bankrupt. Not because the properties were bad, he just didn't know when to stop. He kept buying more because he could, and it's the rhythm that he was in. If he'd stopped to set a goal, he would have realized he'd already achieved it and he could have stopped before he pushed things too far. Now, this was pre-2008, when getting mortgages was much easier, so it's not the kind of problem you're likely to have today. But it does show why having a clear goal is so important for everyone at the start of your journey and beyond. Saying, I want to be a property investor isn't a goal, and if you can't define what your exact goal is, you're not ready. And the reason this is so important with property is that when you're investing in something like an ISA, changing your mind is easy. You can sell up and try something else. But with property, every change costs you. Stamp duty, legal fees, agent fees. Things will go wrong. Deals will fall through. Tenants will miss payments, mortgage rates will jump higher than you expected. Giving up on property when things get tough is more painful than the embarrassment of spotting your still pristine gymwear at the bottom of a drawer. But if you have a clear goal, like knowing you need £4,000 in monthly rental income to replace your salary in 10 years, suddenly everything becomes clearer. You know exactly how many properties you need, what kind of returns each one should generate, and, just as importantly, when to stop. And our next point is actually related to this, because having a goal is great, but it's not enough. I recently met an investor with 5 properties in, he admitted, pretty rough areas. On paper, it sounded decent. They were all bringing in good monthly cash flow. But there was a problem. He'd copied this strategy from someone else without thinking about his own goals. When we sat down and talked it through, what he actually wanted was to maximize his wealth for retirement in 20 years. And although the properties he owned were bringing in some decent cash now, because of what they are and where they are, they're unlikely to see any meaningful growth in value. Wrong strategy, wrong areas, wrong type of properties. So if you don't have a clear long-term plan, again, you're not ready. Think about it this way. Once you know where you want to end up, you can just work backwards. How many properties do you need? Which areas will help get you there? What types of properties will serve your goals? Without this kind of plan, you risk jumping between strategies and going nowhere. By the way, if you're struggling with this and you want to map out your own property strategy as we go through this video, you can download our free property strategy guide in the description below. Just last month, someone wrote into our Sunday Times column about their flat in London. They'd bought it a year and a half ago and were feeling pretty confident about their investment until the tax bill arrived. Despite the property generating a good rental profit, they were actually losing money after tax. Not because the property was bad, but because they bought it in their own name instead of through a company. Before 2016, this wouldn't have mattered much, but then the tax rules changed. Now, some investors are paying thousands more in tax than they need to, money that could have gone towards their next property. And you can't just switch to a company structure later. Well, you can, but it's really expensive. So this brings us to our 4th warning sign. You haven't decided on your ownership structure. Now, tax isn't the only thing to consider when making this decision. You also have to think about how you plan to use the rental income, how many properties you want to buy, and what your long-term goals are. And you also need to get clear on something else that lots of people overlook. Many people struggle with the idea of taking on debt. So they do one of 2 things. They either buy properties with cash, which limits how many they can own, or they take out repayment mortgages instead of interest-only loans, which eats into their monthly profits, which is like choosing to invest with one hand tied behind your back. Now, you might be thinking, isn't paying off debt a good thing? Well, let me explain something. If you put £300,000 into a property, it might go up by 4% in a year. That's £12,000 in growth. That's not bad, but I mean, it's not any more than you'd expect from a diversified collection of other investments. But if you only put in £100,000 and used a mortgage for the rest, that same £12,000 growth means that you've made 12% on your money instead. This is why mortgages are property's biggest advantage over other investments. Without them, you might as well put your money elsewhere. So if you're not comfortable using debt as an investment tool, you're not ready to invest in property yet. But if you don't feel comfortable with it, there is something you can do about it. Start by understanding the difference between bad debt and investment debt. Credit card debt, bad. Pay it off. Mortgage on your own home, for most people, paying this off makes sense. But a mortgage on an investment property, that's a tool for growing wealth. So it sounds harsh, but for me, it is this simple. Get comfortable with debt or forget about property. And this brings us to the final sign you aren't ready to invest in property. And it's perhaps the most important one and the most common misconception. Most people think they're getting a good deal means negotiating below the asking price. They see a property advertised for £300,000, get it for £290,000 and feel like they've won. But what they don't realise is that the asking price has nothing to do with the actual value. That property might only be worth £260,000 and the seller is just trying their luck. Suddenly you're £30,000 down before you even start, and it could take years just to break even. That also dramatically affects your ability to grow your portfolio if your plan was to pull money out of the property when its value goes up. And it goes beyond just the purchase price. If you get your rental calculations wrong, what you thought would put money in your pocket could end up becoming a monthly cost that puts you under financial stress. So if you don't know how to analyze a deal property, it's a sign that you shouldn't be thinking about investing just yet. But the good news is, deal analysis is just a skill. And like any other skill, you can learn it. So check out this video next, where I explain the exact deal analysis system that we use to analyse over £100 million worth of property deals every year.